So over on the NA version of the game, we have a very strong free-to-play servant being available for all masters that are able to finish this current Guda event, and do not make the mistake that I did where the last time this event came around, I had my Kagetora ready to go, I had all of her skills at 999, fully leveled up, almost put some grails into her before I actually realized I hadn't finished the story and unlocked my Kagetora, and literally missed her by about maybe 5 minutes. So don't be like me. Farm this servant up. She's extremely good, as we'll go over in today's video, but yeah, just don't make my mistake. And if you did make my mistake last year, hopefully, you know, me actually making it also makes you feel better in some capacity. But let's go ahead and start off by talking about our hits, which are pretty high actually for the things that are important for her, because she has a 5-hit quick card with 12.2% star gen and a passive 6% riding buff that is buffing that quick card. Meaning this quick card can actually surprisingly put in some work, in particular with some of the buffs she gets on her 3rd skill. It actually means that she's an art servant that can actually drop some stars for herself, especially if you're in a brave chain where you also get to take advantage of that 5-hit extra attack, because if you're not in the know, the extra attack is a composite card that drops stars, NP, and does big boy damage. And even though it doesn't have the natural buff that the quick cards do to get that buff star gen rate, it being 5 hits in a chain with the quick card does actually allow Kagetora to drop a few stars for herself, which is a little crucial for her gameplay because her natural NP gain is a little bit on the lower side at 0.45%, but she has really high hits on her 2 arts cards that both have 4 hits each. So the idea is that you gen stars and then you get crits on those arts cards, and then you actually refund a metric butt ton of your NP back. That also being said, Kagetora has like 2 different ways of buffing up her NP gain as well, which we'll talk about as we go into her skills right now. Starting off with her first skill, this just gives her a 30% arts buff for 1 turn, and then it gives her some pretty decent star weight for 1 turn on a 5-turn cooldown. This is both good and bad. Good in the sense that the arts buff is buffing up the damage of her arts cards, which is obviously good for her NP. It's also buffing up the NP gain of her arts cards. The star weight is really critical for getting crits on said arts card. The only unfortunate bit about this skill is that these are both only 1-turn buffs on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning she's going to be more of a burst servant, but I don't doubt that in the future she could get a buff that just bumps these both up to 3 turns each. Because typically when you have a 30% card buff, you're usually getting that for 3 turns just flat out. And then if you have a larger buff, like let's say 50% or 55% in some rarer cases, that's usually going to be either for 1 turn or 3 turns that also are stipulated by 3 attacks, right? To kind of limit it just a little bit. So it's like technically those are also 3-turn, quote unquote, but they really only last for 3 attacks. So that's kind of the way they balance them. Kagetora kind of came out towards the tail end of when they were kind of swapping the metas around. That's probably why she only has 30% for 1 turn, but I don't doubt again, in the future they bump these both up to 3 turns. Still very good right now, because as I said, buffing up the damage of her arts cards, her NP gain, all very good. The star absorption, very, very strong, because she really wants to get crits on her arts cards specifically, but we would like to see a buff for that in the future. Same thing for the second skill. The second skill really, really strong because it gives her a turn of evasion, which is good for survivability, makes her very good in boss fights, but also it gives her a 30% NP gain buff for 1 turn, and again, this is on a 5-turn cooldown like the other skill. The only thing I really have to complain about here is the 30% NP gain buff only being for 1 turn. Again, very good for burst turns where you have like an arch chain with her NP, because she'll pretty much refund like 200% of her NP if you've got crits for her if you have the first and second skill up, which is also probably why they did go ahead and limit them to 1 turn, because her ability to just loop her NP and just massive globs of it in brave chains that have crits, which she can kind of provide for herself, or you can use people like Caskill, or even just throw double 20-30s on your 2 Castorias when she comes out in a little bit. Her ability to just kind of have stars and the ease of access we have for just grabbing a random support type servant with 20-30 and they kind of just function as a star gen now, does mean she's really nasty when it comes to looping her NP. And at the time, they probably didn't want another fiasco like, say, Chloe or Kentucky Ryder, who before their even main supports were coming out, they were just looping their NPs like a bunch of madmen. So they're probably trying to rein in her power a little bit, but don't be surprised that in the future, the first skill and this NP gain buff get bumped up to being 3 turns, as well as, I don't know, some special damage mod getting thrown her way as well. But then her third skill is just kind of a nice just set of buffs for the entire party. She gives everybody a 20% attack buff for 3 turns, 20% crit damage, and 20% star gen, all for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This is just a really strong charisma. Well, obviously, we'd like to see the critical damage be at least 30% if you're giving it to the entire party. 20% is still not bad when paired with other skills, especially because Kagetora herself is kind of like a burst servant. So in a way, she's using this to give power to the other servants. So like, let's say every 3 turns, she's going to be bursting her NP because you have Tamamo in your party or something, and you're just lowering her skill cooldown to help her burst even faster. If you got like Tamamo, Kagetora, and then another like pseudo DPS, pseudo support type servant, you can actually really start putting in a lot of work, because she also has this ability to kind of lend a little bit of support to the rest of the party, which I like to see in free-to-play servants, because in my eyes, free-to-play servants are supposed to buff up the boxes of everyone that might not have specific servants, right? And kind of like fill in gaps that they might have. So Kagetora is kind of functioning as a really good burst arts single target lancer that can also provide a little bit of utility to the party with a really strong support in her 3rd skill. Now, her NP is a bit on the more whack side, I guess. It does a lot of damage because she's a free NP 5. As you guys will see when the NP chart gets flashed up there. Don't see her down there in 12th place and be like, oh, she's not doing any damage. No. You got to look at her at NP 5 because she's a free NP 5. Meaning, for a reference, she's going to be hitting harder than someone like Skahawk. Obviously, without Skahawk not having her special damage mod buff, let's not cap or anything. But she's hitting harder than Skahawk, Brynhilder, Melusine, Lee Schwinn, all those other people up there. Because her NP5 damage is just really, really solid. Obviously, again, doesn't really have a special damage mod, so can't really compete with the upper echelon of Brynhilder and Skahawk's damage. But the fact that they pretty much give you a free servant that can hit that hard is insanely strong. The reason I say it's whack is because the effects on it are a little weird. Like, she just removes offensive buffs and reduces their critical attack chance by 20% for 3 turns. It's a little more on the whack side because you're just like, you don't really care about the offensive buffs very much. The one that's really good is removing your opponent's defensive buffs, especially if it procs first. But if you remove your opponent's defensive buffs, even if it doesn't proc first, which, you know, obviously you do want that one because that's the one that's better, because that means you could pretty much just hit whoever you want with your NP because they can't put up defense, invul, or anything like that. But even if it doesn't proc first, right, you can have it be the lead NP, right? I've done certain team comps where I'll bring like Melta Lilith and then another single target quick servant, whether it be someone like Pintoki Rider or like Kagetora or someone along those lines, right? Although Kagetora might not be the best example, but what I'm getting at is that I would have Melta Lilith attack first because she also has the same thing, but it doesn't proc first. But it's like, okay, Melta Lilith can lead off with the NP, buff the NP overcharge of the following NP, and remove all of the buffs so my next servant can get a clean attack in, right? I'm just saying you can do stuff like that. Removing offensive buffs, not bad, right? Because obviously if they proc something like Pierce Invincibility, and you're going to try to use like Invincibility to keep yourself alive next turn, it's very good to go ahead and get rid of that. It does come up sometimes. It's just removing defensive buffs is by and large usually much better. But then again, they gave you an absolute cutie patootie servant that can burst enemies down and just hits really, really hard. So what more could you ask for? And on the bright side, you don't even have to be like, hey, should I summon for this servant? Because she's absolutely free. Just go play the Guda Guda event, get yourself Kagetora, and call it a day. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I stream every weekday over on my Twitch. Make sure you guys come out to those streams. It is free bonus content. And then if you want to further support the channel, you can go over to LD Emulator, which is linked down in the description down below. I'm affiliated with them. And if you download LD Emulator, not only will you get a good emulator to play games on your PC, but you'll also be supporting the channel for absolutely free. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.